The rumble of a diesel engine echoed down Maple Ridge Drive as a tow truck came to a stop in front of Karen Patan's immaculate colonial home. Dangling from its steel chains was a bright blue porta-potty, swaying slightly in the morning breeze, with a hiss of hydraulics. The unit was lowered toward her award-winning rose garden, the moment the toilet touched down with a dull thud beside her prized American Beauty roses. Karen burst out of her front door, her shriek carried across the street, loud enough to send neighbors scurrying to their windows. As if to mock her, the porta-potty's door creaked open in the wind, revealing its dark, plastic interior. But to explain how things got to this point, I need to back up. My name is David, and 3 months ago, I bought a half-acre corner lot in the Oakwood Estates subdivision. It was the perfect spot to build a modest ranch-style home where I could enjoy my retirement. The lot had sat abandoned for years, choked with weeds and littered with garbage. I thought the neighborhood would be glad to see it cleaned up at last. I followed every rule to the letter, secured the permits, hired an architect, and even attended the HOA meeting to introduce myself and outline my plans. On weekends, I worked on the lot myself, hauling away old tires and trimming back the overgrowth. I made sure to respect the HOA's restrictions, never working before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. on weekdays, and never disturbing the peace on Sundays. That was when Karen noticed me. She lived 3 houses down in the largest home on the street, and as president of the HOA. For 6 years, she considered herself the reigning monarch of Oakwood Estates. Karen Patan was in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move even in a stiff wind. She ran the neighborhood with an iron fist, disguised in cheerful newsletters and official-looking citations. The first time she approached me, I was loading dead branches into my truck. Clipboard in hand, she strode across the street, her heels clicking like a countdown to trouble. With a tight smile, she told me my lot was disrupting the visual harmony of the community. I pointed out that I was actually improving the property by cleaning it. Unfazed, she replied that change itself could be disruptive, and mentioned that residents had already complained about the noise from my truck. When I asked which residents, she said the details were confidential. That was the moment I realized I had a problem. The following week, my first official citation arrived in the mail. I was fined $75 for violating code 7.3. to allowing construction debris to remain visible from the street for more than 4 hours. The so-called debris was the same pile of branches she'd seen me loading into my truck. I paid the fine, hoping it would smooth things over, but it turned out to be just the beginning. The citations kept coming. My truck was supposedly parked 2 inches over the property line. The orange safety cones I'd placed around a hole were not an approved shade of orange. I had failed to submit Form 47 bytes before removing a dead tree stump. Each notice carried a steeper fine, and every time I tried to reason with Karen, she just gave me that same tight smile and reminded me that rules exist for a reason. Then came the morning that changed everything. I arrived at my lot to find a bright blue porta-potty planted squarely in the middle of the cleared ground dead center where my home's foundation was supposed to go. It wasn't tucked in a corner or out of sight. It was right there, glaringly obvious with its white roof and moon-shaped vent. I called the number printed on the side. The rental company told me the unit had been ordered by none other than Karen P. on behalf of the Oakwood Estates HOA, under the justification of worker sanitation compliance. 6 months prepaid. I explained I hadn't even broken ground yet, that construction wouldn't start for at least another month, but they said they were just following the order. Fuming, I went straight to Karen's house. She answered the door, dressed for her job as a bank manager, her smile stretched tighter than ever. With feigned concern, she explained she'd received multiple complaints about my lack of proper facilities. When I reminded her that no construction had even begun, she quoted Ordinance 12.6, which apparently required sanitation facilities to be in place before any work could start. Then, with sugary sweetness, she told me I ought to be thanking her for being so proactive. The HOA, in its infinite generosity, had covered the porta-potties, causing as an emergency funds earmarked for community health and safety. Karen informed me that if I wanted it moved to a less prominent spot on my lot, D. Need to file Form 81C and wait for board approval, a process that wouldn't happen for another 3 weeks. So for 3 long weeks, every time I stopped by my lot, that blue monstrosity sat there like a mocking sentinel. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was a declaration of war. Karen had planted her flag, quite literally, in the center of my property. The rental company refused to move it without authorization from the signer of the lease. The HOA board, stacked with Karen's loyal allies, brushed off my complaints as if I were being petty. But Karen had made a mistake. See, bullies thrive on intimidation, but the way to beat them is with documentation. And I had been keeping meticulous records. When I filed an official request for HOA records, I got my hands on the rental agreement. That when I discovered something interesting. Eliswa-san teinte oa esnemetol. Karen had signed it personally, listing herself as authorized representative. Even better, she'd used her own credit card for the deposit. That changed everything. According to the rental company's terms of service, whoever signed the lease had full authority over the unit's placement and relocation. They had delivered it to the exact spot she requested, but technically, anyone with her written authorization could request it be moved, and I just happened to have her signature on a stack of citation notices she'd emailed me. That's when I called my cousin Mike. He runs a towing and transport business in Riverside, and I knew he had the right equipment for the job. I explained the situation, showed him the lease agreement and Karen's signature, and asked if he could help. He grinned and said, "I'd be happy to relocate some construction equipment for family." We set the plan for Thursday morning, 3 a.m. sharp. When the time came, Mike rolled up with his flatbed truck and crane attachment, the kind used for moving heavy machinery. We worked quietly, positioning the truck just right. With a few practiced motions, Mike hooked the straps and chains, and the porta-potty rose smoothly into the air, dangling like it weighed nothing at all. Within 20 minutes, we were creeping down the silent streets of Oakwood Estates, with our glowing blue prize swaying gently behind us. Karen's house sat on a corner lot, her lawn the crown jewel of the neighborhood. She'd won Yard of the Month so many times, the award might as well have been named after her. Her diagonal lawn stripes were razor sharp. Her roses once featured in the local paper. That's exactly where we set it. Mike lowered the porta-potty with surgical precision onto the edge of her pristine loan 18 inches from her treasured David Austin roses. As a final flourish, he pulled out a solar-powered light and mounted it on the roof, ensuring the unit gave off a soft, ghostly blue glow through the night. We snapped photos for documentation close-ups showing the toilet was on her property, not blocking sidewalks, not violating any codes. It was perfect. The next morning, I parked across the street at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, waiting. At exactly 7 a.m., Karen emerged, designer purse on her arm, dressed for another day at the bank. She made it halfway to her car before she saw it. The scream that tore from her throat was worth every sleepless night she'd caused me. For a full 10 seconds, she just stood there, frozen in disbelief, before rushing at the porta-potty as if she could will it out of existence. Within moments, her phone was in hand, and she was pacing the driveway, gesturing wildly as she made call after call. The rental company, the police, the HOA board, anyone who would listen. But karma has a funny way of working, and sometimes it comes with paperwork. The rental company checked their records and confirmed the obvious. Yes, Karen Patan had full authority over the unit's placement. When she sputtered that she hadn't authorized this, they pointed out that someone with her signature had. By 8 a.m., half the neighborhood had driven by 2 gawk. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, even stopped her morning walk to snap a photo. Karen, now running late for work, was practically vibrating with rage as she stood in her driveway, helpless. The rental company told her they'd be happy to move it, but only for an additional fee, prepaid in full. At 9 a.m., the police finally arrived. I watched from my lot as Karen gesticulated wildly, pointing between the blue toilet on her lawn and my property. The officer listened, took notes, nodded sympathetically, then shrugged. The porta-potty was on her property. The lease was in her name, and as far as the law was concerned, there was no crime here. The police officer had been clear. This was a civil matter. That evening, the HOA convened an emergency board meeting, and it quickly became the most crowded in Oakwood Estates history. Word had spread fast, and the clubhouse was standing room only. Karen presided at the head table, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. Naturally, the Porta-Potty fiasco was the first agenda item. Karen wasted no time. Claim it. I had maliciously vandalized her property by moving the unit onto her lawn, and demanded the HOA take immediate action lawsuits. Fines, whatever the bylaws would allow. But then something unexpected happened. Tom Morrison, a board member, usually known for rubber stamping Karen's every whim, asked to see the original rental paperwork. As the documents were passed around, the mood in the room shifted. Why had Karen used her personal credit card for an HOA expense? Why had she arranged placement on my property without board approval? And where exactly had those emergency funds she mentioned come from? Karen fumbled through her answers, growing more flustered with each question. For the first time since I'd moved in, I saw cracks in her ironclad control. Then Margaret Chun, the HOA treasurer, opened her laptop and began pulling up financial records right there at the table. Her frown deepened as she scrolled. She finally announced she could find no authorization for the rental nor any record of the emergency fund withdrawal, Karen had claimed. A low murmur rippled through the room. That's when 80-year-old Mr. Petrov, one of the neighborhood's founding residents, slowly rose to his feet. In his thick Russian accent, he declared, "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to this tiny dictator." The room erupted in laughter, and suddenly the floodgates opened. Years of pent-up frustration spilled out complaints about Karen's citations, her high-handed decisions, her smug newsletters. By the time the meeting ended, 3 decisions had been made. No action would be taken against me regarding the Porta-Potty. A full financial audit of the HOA would begin immediately. A special election would be held in 2 weeks to determine Karen's future as president. Karen sat stiffly at the table, her face alternating between red and pale, as her carefully maintained kingdom unraveled. The Porta-Potty remained on her lawn for exactly 17 days. Each morning, she emerged from her house, glaring at it like she hoped it might spontaneously combust. She called every towing company she could find, but none would touch it without the rental company's permission. She begged the city to declare it a health hazard, but the unit had never even been used. One evening, she even tried pushing it off her lawn herself, a futile effort several amused neighbors captured on video. The rental company, meanwhile, stood firm. Relocation would cost $847, due upfront. Until the balance was paid, the unit wasn't going anywhere. With the audit underway, the HOA board refused to authorize a single dollar without proper documentation. Karen was stuck. During those 17 days, something changed in Oakwood Estates. Neighbors who had endured Karen's reign of petty citations and arbitrary rules began to find their voices. The ballot for the special election didn't just include a vote on Karen's presidency. It also contained several amendments designed to curb HOA power and enforce transparency. Campaign signs popped up in yards across the subdivision, something that just weeks earlier would have earned an instant citation. On the morning the results were announced, I sat across the street, coffee in hand, watching Karen's house. The Porta-Potty still loomed on her lawn, its once bright blue panels now dulled with dust. When Karen finally emerged, she looked different. Her hair was slightly frazzled, her usual power suit replaced with a plain pantsuit. She already knew the outcome. I was sure. Out of 147 votes cast, only 12 supported keeping her as president. The amendments passed by overwhelming margins, but the real blow came later that day when Margaret Chun revealed the preliminary audit findings. It turned out Karen had been using HOA funds like her personal piggy bank for years, disguising personal expenses as community improvements. The district attorney's office was notified, and within a week, Karen was facing charges of embezzlement and misuse of fiduciary funds. The total missing, just over $38,000 across 6 years. Not enough for a lengthy prison term, but enough to end her banking career and ensure she'd never again hold any position of financial trust. On the day Karen was formally charged, she finally paid the balance to have the Porta-Potty removed. I watched from my lot as the same towing company rolled up to haul it away. Karen stood in her doorway, arms crossed, overseeing the removal with what little dignity she could muster. When the truck pulled out, she spotted me across the street. Our eyes met. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. She retreated inside, slamming the door behind her. The plea deal she eventually accepted included 2 years probation, 6 months of community service, restitution of all embezzled funds, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. At sentencing, she stood in a plain gray suit, stripped of all her old swagger, listening as the judge lectured her about betraying her community's trust. When the sentence was read, she swayed slightly, but forced herself to remain upright. As court officers escorted her away to process her probation, she kept her chin raised, eyes fixed straight ahead of final, hollow attempt at defiance that fooled no one.